So today you won't see you here like this. It's fine. Okay. I have less things to hold. Thanks. So as you won't probably see anything similar to what you've seen this past few days, since I won't show you a concrete architectural project, but I will show you a research which is very much connected to what we do every day, but it's the analysis on a specific territory in Italy. So we all have seen in the past couple of years a set of alarming news clocking in from distant areas of the world and intensifying peace. And all these news have declared that the great acceleration, the Anthropocene, is in fact in full speed. In these past couple of years, in fact, we have realized that the Anthropocene has shown us that we have reached a critical threshold. The acceleration of the modernization has propelled systems to become increasingly more socio-natural. And I would like to quote Andreas Malm in this, who rightly wrote in 2018 that postmodernity seems to be visited by its antithesis, a condition of time and nature conquering ever more space. And in fact, the ecological crisis of which we start to become aware is making even more evident all the anthropic pressure dynamics upon nature, which is something that is bringing even more clear and profound uncertainties in our society, geopolitical conflicts, biopolitical tragedies, displacements of issues of people, and deep inequalities. In the last 40 years, we have, as these pictures testify, we have witnessed lots of transformation in the urban environment and the rearticulation of the urban spaces that require us to acknowledge that there are strong connection, actually, even though not visible, in between urban spaces and what we used to call non-urban space, so what we used to understand as nature, something which is outside our living environment. But we have to acknowledge the fact that in between non-urban and urban spaces, there are yet long-distance interaction of systems that actually produce cities as much as architecture does. And in this condition, there are a certain type of systems that are not particularly examined or considered as fundamental within these processes, which are the energy productive systems, no? And as nature, we are testifying, it continues to be exploited, it continues to be used, accumulated, accumulation of resources and extraction of resources and exploitation. We can look at hydraulic system, and in this specific case, I will talk to you about hydropower systems as a way to investigate certain ways of doing, certain ways of controlling territories, and ways of producing the landscape. So with this presentation, as was anticipated, I will show you a bit of a research which is called The Machine in the Mountain, and is a research that I have pursued during my doctoral studies, and is a study that has looked into one specific hydro basin, which is the Piave River, which is this tiny river connecting the Dolomites to the Venetian Lagoon. It's the only alpine system that connects the Dolomites to Venice. They used to at least do that before the Venetian diverted the river outside to the Adriatic Sea. And it is, we can say that it is the most engineered hydro basin in the entire Europe. So you can see from this map the location of Piave and its long course from the high peaks of the glaciers until the Adriatic Sea, and its relation today with the Lagoon of Venice. This work has been done with the purpose to argue that by bringing upfront the anatomy of the riverine infra-nature is a way to question both the role of water apparatus within the urbanization process, as well as the interplay of all the socio-economical dynamics occurring within the territory, especially within dams' economy of power. Is also a way to question both what we inherited as productive systems from 100 years ago. This is just an example, but you can see these similar situations in many rivers, in many territories in Europe and beyond. In fact, during this research, I've looked into similarities or similar cases, or we can say mostly debated current cases, like the one of the Vjosa River, which is this river running across Greece and Albania, which is a hot case study at the moment. So this was an attempt to understand which kind of legacy we have, how the territory is working, and which kind of decision or architecture and urban decision we can take for the future in the current climatic regime. So if it is no doubt that the territory is the representation of urban phenomena, this is a case that really exemplifies lots and condenses lots of the issues and problems and dynamics that we are today curing in many different areas of the world. As I was saying, this is a river that spans from the Dolomites to the sea. It's a 222 kilometers long course river, which, however, does not behave as a river anymore. In fact, it does not flow, nor gush, sometimes it does flood, but it does not do anything which reminds a pristine river, a pristine natural system. It does a lot of action, which we will see a bit later, as it's commodified by capital in order to produce power, but other certain type of productive systems embedded within its own machinic identity. In the past, since millennia, it used to be a very important highway, we could say, so connected the mountains to the city of Venice, bringing goods and stuff, all types of materials and people down from the mountains to the Adriatic Sea. If you would go to Venice today, there is a place called Zattere, which means wood rafts, and it's where it's an area of the city in front of Giudecca Canal, and it's a place where all the wood rafts coming from the mountains were bringing down materials for Venice. So not just tiny things or just people not traveling across the river to get down, but mainly wood, because the city of Venice is produced with wood which is extracted from the mountain. So wood was cut, assembled, and it was floating across this territory, reaching Venice, and accumulate to the city to then be used, and also rafts were used in this process. And here you can see, have a picture of what was the situation many, many years ago, with all the rivers contributed to the formation of Venice, and the numerous amount of modification that this river has suffered even before modernization came in. And in fact, modernity projected a very different future for this territory, but beyond. No? All the warfare technology that were used in the 20th century for war, indeed, at some point became useless, but actually became fundamental to extract certain type of resources that before were impossible to use or extract. And in this case, it became fundamental, like you see back bombing, for example, to open up pipelines and route for the construction of new ways, pathways, or in this case, for the construction of big dams. As you can see, that's a super experimental first project. The concrete was still in a very experimental phase, so we have to consider that everything was an extensive laboratory. You can see here one of the many locations in construction and a laboratory where the big dam called Vaillant, which you might have heard about. It's a sad tragedy that happened in 1963, where when the mountain collapsed, and it caused lots of death. The project that is deployed along this river, but beyond, you can find it in all entire, at least in north of Italy, was manipulated by a certain number of companies, and in this case by a specific society, which was called the Società Adriatica di Elettricità, and the head of this company was, the main personality was this guy that you see here, which became a count, Giuseppe Volpi. He was the mastermind of this entrepreneurial company, but also crucially, the figure behind decision taken to transform this territory. He was at the same time the financial minister of the fascist government by that time. So he literally was the guy who was proposing projects at the same time signing up for acceptance of these great works. So he envisioned that we could take the power of the Alps and transfer it down to the lagoon. And he decided that, of course, together with a relevant group of other characters, main Venetian characters, to do so at the fringe of the lagoon environment. I'm sure you, all of you who have been in Venice have realized, or by landing or by crossing the bridge, that there is a very weird, huge petrochemical site on your left if you cross by land. And that's where they decided to construct that site. And the reason why they decided to do so was, in fact, to reuse the hydropower capacity of the territory behind Venice. So in this sense, we can say that the Piave hydro geographies of power, it's actually the reason why, the reason behind the counter, this decision, and in a way we can define it as a counter landscape, certainly as a reciprocal landscape of Venice in this sense. These are some of the pictures you can see. Like there was the master plan that engineer Coencagli developed to make this swampy area in Tabula Rasa able to accommodate the petrochemical site. So basically, if we go and look into certain moments of this history, but this is something that applies in all of similar case studies and beyond, we realize that if we go and see who is part in certain decision, which were their role, which were the agencies and expectation, we really are able to dissect the reason why certain decisions were made. And these, of course, have huge impact on the way in which a territory has been developed, is developed even today. That tiny, we could say, area, although larger than the city of Venice itself, actually became a crucial bit of the territory, being able to support the development of the entire region, the Veneto region, of course, beyond, being tied to other systems in the entire north of Italy, but beyond, even to this side of Europe. Volpi has lots of entrepreneurial activities on this side of the Adriatic Sea as well. This was fundamental in propelling the modernization of Italy beyond the willingness of dragging Venice into a modernity, trying to revive the city through a new level of infrastructurization. So, as I said, if you go and look into characters involved in this type of works, but also if we look into other types of media also, like if you go and look at the magazine produced at that time, or at the advertisement, or territorial cartographies, we understand that they were all choreographed attempts, in this case, of course, by the specific ideology of the fascist movement, which saw in this project a way to enhance the propaganda machinery they had in place at that time. So for them, the representation was fundamental. The way in which they were projecting to public, the way in which they were constructing new cities, and before that, of course, modifying the landscape, was fundamental to be portrayed in a certain ways in order to not just convey a sense of fixing of nature, amelioration of way of living and inhabiting usually difficult environments. You have imagined the mountain is quite harsh as an environment to live, but as well as the swampy soils all around Venice and other areas of Italy. So reclamation, hydropower, all these were steps that were used by then and exploited to convey an image of a fixing of the human nature itself also. And an interesting also way to realize this is if we go and look into certain numbers of documentaries made by prominent figures like Pasolini, Pasinetti, or even Jean-Luc Godard in Switzerland for the Dam of the La Grande Dixence. They are oftenly documentaries, but sometimes they are just the background of movies. Like in the case of the Fedaya Dam, that building site, it became like a huge, important background for that movie, where we could really see how workers were involved into the construction of dams, so really how labor was deployed and which was the reality behind the construction of certain things. This was a very crucial and important aspect to consider. What post-modernity has done, though, so what we are still doing, is actually making this landscape even more operational. And in fact, turning what is already a machinic condition into an organical, mechanical second nature. To use Richard White's term that used to define rivers as a second nature when it comes to these type of conditions. So we can realize that as we look into the exploitation of the riverine landscape, at the same time there is a development of all the type of infrastructures that vertically sustain the way in which we inhabit the territory and the way in which we develop the urban areas. So some of the issues, of course, that we have as a generation, of course, to face today is the problem of lack of water. No? This is something that we have drastically realized, especially last summer. So this is not just a problem, of course, of lacking of drinkable water, but irrigation, of course, for fields, but also it's a problem of the result of the landscape, no? You have to imagine that this is the type of landscape with this artificial big reservoir that has been modified 100 years ago, and it took 100 years for people who inhabited this landscape to get used to a different type of environment, to try to make use of this place in a different way, from having a valley which was pasteurized or just a pristine natural space. A lot of development, a lot of different activities emerged and were developed along this type of lakes. So all sorts of touristic activities, new towns, and lots more. But this is a situation that we face in many moments of the year. Another important problem is the fact that there is a lot of sedimentation which is blocked within the reservoir. You can see from a picture of when the bridge was originally constructed across the valley to a picture of just a few years ago. This is from 2018, after a huge storm. So you can see the amount of sedimentation which is blocked in with the reservoir. This is, of course, not just jeopardize the capacity of dams to hold water and therefore to produce energy, but of course, it jeopardizes the functioning of the system itself, no? The clearing, of course, that we have to face the aging of these infrastructures. This also brings together a huge problem, which is the lack of sedimentation flowing across the territory, which has a double type of results. One is that water flows much harshly and much quicker across the territory. Sorry, I thought I had another picture to show, but I don't. That brings harsher flooding. Now, imagine there is water. This is a very nice metaphor I got told once by an hydraulic engineer. You have to imagine water flowing across the territory, traveling without a backpack, basically. It's like someone traveling with a backpack. This brings harsher flooding, and of course, this is much more problematic when water reaches urbanized environments. This is also a problem for the lack of sedimentation across the coastline, because beaches and coastlines are eroded every day, no, even more, and this is also playing a fundamental part into it. At the same time, as Mitesh was also talking about before, and with the opening of the session, there is a problem of extraction of gravel materials, which is still so fundamental in construction activities, not for architecture itself. We used to call it white gold extraction. In this case, it's so precious. There's a lot of fighting and a lot of disputes about who owns certain bits of land and who has the right to extract gravel and produce concrete. So the effects of all these dynamics are reflected in the way in which the territory have been modified. across the year. Oh, okay, I had the picture, sorry. So this is also an image from a few years ago, that you can see the amount of damages that a situation of such a machinic environment can bring. There's something more that is topping up upon all these dynamics, which is something that do we tackle unresponsive or unproductive pieces of machining landscape. So how do we really, how we can decide to change certain bits of our territories when they are so embedded in certain dynamics and certain sustainment of urbanization processes. To what extent can we reduce the energy demand, and which other forms of development we can imagine? And this is so urgent, especially now that we are really looking into an energetic transition with the energy crisis that we are about to face. So in this sense, this tiny river, in a way, is exemplary of how capital made use of territory, and is exemplary of the capitalocene palimpsest that has been constructed, layered up in the Veneto region. So if we try to understand, it's quite complex. I think it's really difficult to understand the limits and the borders in between what's natural and what's artificial. If you would cross along the landscape, it's really, really difficult. So many of these systems are embedded or underground constructed, so beyond seeing big, fascinating, great dams, we don't see lots of what's going on actually within the territory. So a way to tackle this is something that the research has attempted to do, is a way to challenge way and modes of representation that we use as architects, as designers. So to try to represent, as a way to understand, to represent the territory differently, so in a with a thicker representation. Of course, in doing so, like this is a bird view X-ray cartography. In this operation, what is fundamental, of course, is the famous Patrick Geddes section from the valley to the sea, which remains a fundamental theoretical and now drawing tool for all of us. But if we look into that section, what we cannot avoid to realize is that for Geddes, there were relationships across the section were fixed relationship between the cities and the nature. There were certain activities going on, and that type of section doesn't return the current heterotopic character of the relationship between the city and nature. There is much more system. There are much more entanglements going on in between the territory. So one of the things that this research is trying to do through cartographical analysis is a way to represent these things, as a way to understand them before being able to project different projects. And this is, of course, following the one of the statement of James Cornell, which was said that mapping is never neutral. Mapping is actually a very strong design choice, design practice that is fundamental to equip us with the tools and the understanding to be able to project later a project. Piave is also exemplary of the systemic crisis of the Alpine and the European spaces. As all of us have realized, the warming temperature is quite alarming recently. And this is much more harder in the areas exposed to the Mediterranean Sea, of course. This is one of the areas of within this territory. It's not that really high, actually. It's 1,800 meters above the sea level. What you can see from this and this picture are two things. One is the attempt to produce artificial snow, which is something that is unattainable at the moment, not just beside the fact there is no enough water to do so, but there is no temperature to produce and sustain this type of production. At the same time, you see the effort of trying to build even more ski resorts. And in 2018, there was a very huge hurricane called Vaya, which has destroyed over 42,000 square kilometers of forest. This was an unprecedented event. pretty much tied to the warming temperature of the Mediterranean Sea. So this is just one of the exemplification of the kind of extreme events that we will face, not just, of course, in Italy, but unfortunately, especially in all the countries facing the Mediterranean environment. If you would look or go and look again within this territory, the iconic Marmolada massive peak that was sadly on the news last summer, we would be shocked by what's going on up there, no? In fact, Marmolada is important because not just by the fact that glaciers in general are those type of natural systems that more clearly declares the warming temperature, because differently from other type of systems like rivers or deltas, where you would need a specific education or a specific training to be able to recognize the modification of the landscape, glaciers are instantly recording the climatic change. We are seeing already that they are drastically shrinking very fast. In the Marmolada, you could see the differences between 1922 and today. And this is an interesting case because this glacier was recorded used as a thermometer since 100 years. And it was, in fact, an experimental case study, as many others, for this company to produce that major project that I was showing before. You can see the amount of retreat of the glacier and the fact that already 100 years ago they were experimentally trying to exploit ice and water on top of the peak and try to get it down to artificial reservoir and to the hydropower plants. And up there you see a situation a couple of years ago, which is now is drastically changed because last year suddenly a piece of the Marmolada collapsed. So if we go and just look at one of the consequences of this condition, what impacts the most on this territory is the results of the situation on skiing infrastructures. For the Veneto region, skiing infrastructures are fundamental to sustain certain economies, certain areas of the territory. They represent the 64% of the local income. I'm sorry that you cannot appreciate it from the projection, but well, there is this basic gradient color from red to blue, which is an analysis of the ground temperature. And there are a certain number of contour lines that analyze how snow will move upwards in the case of different warming scenarios. So if we think about the current scenarios of a warming up of 2 degrees, only half of the slopes of this infrastructure will be practicable. But in the worst case scenario, among 14 infrastructure, we will be only able to ski on a couple of 2. So this is something that is very drastic because today we are still seeing the amount of investments that we are pouring into certain systems. And it's just exemplary of a situation which is widespread in many of the mountains in Europe. And in fact, if we look at and analyze the larger scale, we realize that there is a similarity, of course, in different areas of the world and of Europe, and this is something that we have to tackle very fast. And although through the years there have been a lot of thinking about how we can manage differently the Alps jointly through a different set of policies that you might know, the Alpine Convention, the Alpine Space, the USALP, they will all, although they were all remaining policies, they were trying to describe or project the Dolomites, the Alps, as different environments, as different imageries. Sometimes as an Olympic playground, sometimes as an obstacle that we have to cut through and connect beyond them. So every time there was an attempt to reimagine them, but without really being able to tackle them together and think collectively about the future. So doing this analysis, what I came up with is a set of 3 figures of analysis of this landscape. One is the Alpine Space Capital, which is a cartography that represents the natural capital of the Alps, where you can see all the breedy soils, water, nature, woodlands, and appreciate the amount of nature capital that sit up there. Secondly, the cartography of the Alps as an apparatus of power. So to understand how much nature is actually sustaining lots of infrastructural projects and sustaining vertically major centers of Europe. And thirdly, the alpine scene as a machinic landscape, where the combination of the understanding of geomorphology, geography, and the way in which we use this landscape is really giving us back the image of the Alps as a thick, productive terrain. I can skip those. So, as I was saying, there are many similarities in many conditions of Europe. Same attitudes, same projects, same types of fundings are being projected in riverine ecosystems. We have to acknowledge the fact that it really sustains a fundamental set of infrastructural dynamics. So in the objectification of nature, we have to understand that we need to decompose the anatomy of the machinic territories that we inhabit, and we have to understand the uneven relationship and the unequal metabolism that are actually sitting within the landscape. So to do so, this research, although initially wanted to try to find fixture solution in certain bits of territory, it's actually realized that one of the major efforts is trying to reconstitute knowledge. Our generation, my generation, even older people than me, don't have a clue of how, like in this case, this hydro basin really works. So we cannot really take a decision on how to tackle certain areas, like how to fix flooding for certain cities, how to find room for the river, like how really we can take a radical decision without understanding what we have inherited. So this research has looked into this point as a way to try to fix this knowledge gap and provide a basic for future projects. So the question of scale. So the definition of effective politics carried out through radical decisions and radical design choices is ultimately questions of space. And of course, this is a question of scale, no? Of scale of understanding and of scale of representation, as Mitesh was saying previously. We need to imply the interdisciplinary approaches to reach a methodological sophistication in order to tackle decision in the condition of uncertainty in which we find ourselves. We need to shift our focus into larger operational landscapes. So we have to transcend binaries of society and nature, urban and non-urban. We have to understand there are deeper entanglements between those, and we have to consider the entire picture. And we have to formulate different perspectives. We need to try to define what referring to Habermas non-trivial machines. So machines that are able to modify, that we are able to modify them or are able to progress through time. So we need to identify flexible solutions, literally, for the future. And this is to summarize at the end, this contribution sits on three concepts, which is the territory as a field of design praxis. And territory considered in this sense as a political technology. In Stuart Eldon's term, this means that this would equip designers and architects and urban planners with the capacity to go beyond certain given work, given argumentation, but to look beyond, in case we could use the metaphor of this conference, so to take out the mask, you look beyond certain agencies and practices. And again, which is the agency of designers. So in this type of approach, we need to understand that our role, our agencies go beyond this, and we have to be part of the discussion and provide through design, medias and ways to discuss certain arguments. So of course, to do so alone, we cannot do it, but we need to become even more disciplinary. But to do so, we need to become more multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. So we are already, discussing things with other fields of expertise, but we really need to try to provide a platform where different action can happen in the future. And to conclude, as we see that nature continues to be exploited, continues to be extracted, accumulated, and used for central use of capital, as Foucault was saying many years ago already, actually we realize there is a whole history of spaces. They're still there, and we have to write about. It's a history definitely of power still that we have to untackle. And just to conclude, in this we have to remind ourselves that if we we could paraphrase what Aldo Leopold used to say, to think like a mountain. So to get closer to the land, this would help us to understand that there is a degree of flexibility that we need to embed in what we construct every day in order to be able to adjust to the future condition. And we need to decide that this is a time for a transition to do so in order to be able to envision different spaces that we want to inhabit in the future.